Okay.
All right, good morning.
Good morning. Late morning today.
Yeah, late night last night
Yeah.
at church.
All right, let's
But,
get started here.
What a blessing. All right. Who wants to start today?
You want to kick us off? What are we looking at?
All right. I'll go for it. So, continuing in 2 Samuel, I read chapters 4 and 5 this morning just because 4 was pretty short. It was just like when Saul's son gets murdered. So it was, I think it was I don't know the word for them, but they were like kind of like Saul's son's men. And like when they saw that Saul's son was weak, they murdered him, which just showed their heart.
His attendance or something?
Yeah. It just like showed their heart, but then the biggest thing was how it revealed David's heart when like they went to him and they were like, we killed Saul's son. It's just interesting because they were on Saul's side basically. Then they saw weakness and they turned against him and went to David. They're like, David's gonna be pleased now because we killed Saul's son.
Okay.
So I thought they were gonna, again, there's many cases like this that have happened where people have killed Saul or Saul's people and went to David thinking David was gonna be happy and like bless them for that. But David wasn't. Like he grieved Saul being killed. He grieved any of these murders and then had the people who did the murders killed.
Okay.
To reveal, I guess, like that he was not seeking out the kingdom on his own will.
Huh.
So, I mean, obviously, murder in general is crazy, but what it reveals about David's heart is pretty cool. Just like saying that, like, God's will be done. And as it continues on into chapter 5, David gets anointed again. I don't know if it's like actually again or if they're saying it, but they're basically saying now that Saul's son is dead, all the Israelites are now turning to David like, yeah, our king. And so it's kind of funny because it's like, oh, they were just on Saul's son's side. Now that he's dead, they want to come to David. But either way, to me, it's interesting because though it wasn't, like, David wasn't pleased that Saul's son was killed, right? Because he wanted God to make him king, not himself or a human. Yeah. But yet,
that's what God used.
What was God's plan, essentially, is what I'm wondering. Because if Saul's son was still alive, they wouldn't have came and anointed David king because that was their only option now. Like, it would have continued on with people liking Saul's son too. Yeah. So in a way, it's like God's will of David becoming king happened through that murder. Yeah. But it wasn't a good thing either.
Yeah, I feel like that is a theme though in the Bible where like someone will do something bad, but God uses it. It's like his plan, you know. So like they still get punished for like doing evil, but they're still like. They still are like instruments of God. Like I read somewhere else. It was Nebuchadnezzar was called like a servant of God. He did wicked things and he was punished for it, but he served God's purposes just because, that's what God does. So I guess that's what I would think like maybe is what's going on. Just
okay.
I don't know if that's like God's plan.
I mean, obviously we can't understand God's will versus like his sovereignty and our free will. It's somehow
God works through evil and good.
He works through evil. He makes all things work out for good. So it's kind of like humbling to see like God's overall power over all this. And then mostly what I got out of it, as it continues on, there's two like kind of battles or attacks that happen. So one was with the Jebusites who had possession over Jerusalem, and then they're very prideful about it. David and his men go in, and then they end up overtaking Jerusalem, and that's how Jerusalem becomes the capital or whatever. I don't know what it's called here, but the city of Israel. And during that time, I liked verse 12 in chapter 5 when it says that, because after they did overcome and they conquered Jerusalem, the people built a palace for David. He was becoming king now, you know, like this is being established. And David said, or it says that David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. So I read that as like, David giving God all the glory, kind of. So like, okay, now all these people are loving him. They're building him a palace. Obviously, it's a prime time to become prideful.
Yeah, that's what
but
you think.
it's cool that he says like the Lord established him.
Yeah.
So he's not starting to think he did it himself. That's first. Then he, like, the Lord exalted him as king over his kingdom for the sake of his people. Yeah. So it's for God's kingdom, not for David's.
Right, God's kingdom, not David's.
And it's for God's people, for the sake of God's people. So it's not even just like, it's just like the purpose behind why God does things. It's not for David, but for God's people, for the sake of God's people. So it shows like David's heart for others and for God's glory. So I thought that was really cool. And just thinking about how, like, even he was waiting all this time for this to happen, basically waiting on God to make this all happen for him to be the king, knowing that was God's promise. And so now that he finally received that blessing or the answer to prayer, he gave it all back to God, and he recognized that it was from God and not for him. So I guess, like, it just reveals what a pure heart really is when we get the answer to prayer. Number one, when we're like praying to God for something, or when we're feeling a certain way that like we want God to help and deliver us out of this trial or this emotion, whatever it is. And so during that time is when you can seek God. It reveals your heart if you're really relying on him, if you really want his will, or if you just want the blessing, because then once you get the blessing, that's the second part of the testing of the faith. It's like, are you just going to like love the blessing now, or are you still going to recognize God and your need for him, for his sake and for his glory? So it's like kind of a two-part fold to every trial, and like how it's showcased in David's life here, and to reveal our hearts, to test our faith. So that's just like what we go through.
Yeah.
And then after that, so there's a couple things that happened. One, I noticed how it mentions all of like David's wives, concubines, kids that he has, and just a reminder that like God, this was disobedience against God. Like, this is not what God wants you to live like. And it wasn't like God killed him right there on the spot because he disobeyed. Like, he's seeking after God. He's a man after God's own heart. Yet he's falling into this disobedience, because we all are going to be sinful, even though we're seeking after God's heart. Like, but there's going to be consequences. Like, these kids are going to lead to some of David's biggest like trial, like, and the nation's trials, you know? So like, it'll come forth in the future as trials and of the disobedience. And then the last section was about like the Philistines, and just a very simple thing of, as we pursue God, the enemy is also going to try to pursue and distract us. So now it's like the Philistines are like, we want to attack David, basically. So that, and in David's where it simply says David inquired of the Lord, like, should I go to the Philistines and fight against them? So just the simple inquiring of the Lord. I know it says it a lot in the Bible of this person, that person inquired of the Lord, but it's like so powerful. It's just like, when we're seeking to do God's will, this also reveals our heart. Are we inquiring of the Lord? Because I know in my life, it's like, if everything seems impossible around you, you're going through this like trial or whatever it is. Most important thing is, are you seeking God in it? Because I've seen that if I'm just seeking God, even though I feel horrible, if I'm just seeking God each day in it, just basically telling him how I feel, like being honest and like, I don't know what to do, but please help. And like, it's just a very weak, it could be very weak prayer. But your heart wants God, then he will guide you and he will deliver you. So, he is able to conquer the Philistines after he inquires of the Lord. But
That's cool.
But anyway, I was really excited with my reading. But that was a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, it was encouraging to me. I hope for you too. All right, you can go.
Okay, so I read a couple chapters in Ezra. Like the first one was more like the names, which I didn't like look too much at, but just like the overall. This is like chapters like 2, 3, and 4. But just like some things that I was just thinking about. It's all about like them coming back to rebuild the temple, which has been destroyed, and there's a lot of like discouragements that like they get, and opposition from different people to like not rebuild the temple. And like they've been out for like 70 years, and it's like, how do they restore that relationship with God? Which I guess is something we could think about if like we feel like we've lost some of the fire we had or something, like, or we want to like restore like a temple, like how our bodies are a temple, and as a church we're growing to be a temple. So it's just, that's how I like kind of think about it. And like the different oppositions that they get, like in chapter 3, as they're like starting to build, it says like the younger generation is like very excited and like praising the Lord as the foundation's being laid, but like the older generation is like weeping because they're like, they remembered Solomon's temple, which I read in the commentary, like it amassed to like $4 to $5 billion worth of stuff. Like it was an incredible temple. So now they're looking at this humble, like just trying to like fix it up, and they're like really discouraged. And then that just makes me think about how some like that verse where it's like we look forward to what's ahead and not to look back at like maybe better times you had as a Christian. Like maybe you have some good memories of like seasons in your walk, and like but just we go through times like them, like they went through those 70 years of discipline. We go through our seasons of discipline, but like we have to remember like God has greater things ahead for us. And the prophet Haggai is a prophet during this time, and he says that like the temple will be greater, like the new temple will be greater than the older temple with greater glory. So we need to remember, like, God is building something greater than maybe what we've experienced in the past. And it's like, even through like the trials, and the exile, maybe God's still doing something greater. So that was a cool one. And then chapter 4 just gets into some of the other oppositions that they get from the surrounding nations that don't want them to rebuild. And they delay the build for like quite a number of years, and they just have to like be patient, which is like a tough thing, like when you want to like get things started, and like sometimes the slowness of growth can be discouraging, especially here, like what is it called, so Persia's like the kings of Persia are threatening them to like not rebuild, and some of the nations around them, like even the Samaritans, are saying like they're trying to like discourage them and make them not rebuild. So it's hard when you face a lot of like opposition to what you're trying to do and just kind of give up. But that's like the things that we're gonna be facing, as we try to rebuild the temple of the Lord.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I like patience. That. I don't know if this is what you were thinking of before the first thing that you were saying about like not looking back on your beginning walk or any past season and wishing to have it like that, but that God's always doing a new thing. I don't know if this is the verse you're thinking. This is what I thought of. Isaiah 43. Forget the former things, do not dwell in the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do not perceive it. I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. But like, forget the former things, do not dwell in the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. And I feel like we've experienced that so much of like going through times that we wished we had that excitement or that joy in like the beginning, but then it's like, wait a second. We didn't understand God's love and God's grace the way we do now then. And so God really is doing a new thing, and we can't compare it. And like, if we are pursuing him, he's going to continue to teach and reveal us, kind of like what I learned today too, more like he's going to reveal more of the truth and more of himself little by little. Like, we're on the path of growth as long as we're seeking him, even if it feels like we're not in certain seasons growing at all or learning more. It's like, no, he's the one who's going to teach us. It's not by our might. So like, we can rest in that. And we've seen that in our lives in the most recent. He's so good. Like, more glory to God. I know. It's amazing. So humbling and wonderful, because we know that we didn't do that. We didn't. Yeah. We would have never thought grace was the way that we actually experience and perceive it now. Yeah. Only because he taught us through his spirit and like revealed that to us through his kindness. It's like, my gosh, wow. It's just like the temple, because like it's like what do we think of as glorious? Like Solomon's temple, sure, it was like full of gold and like so much money, but and once also God empowered him to do it, but it's like in a way you can think of that as like man's strength. But God's like, the glory of the future temple is going to be greater, which is built like on that reliance on God. Like, but they're going to need God to build this temple, and we need him. So it's more glory to God. Like, that's the glory. So awesome. It's all him. What you can learn just from the temple. All right, we got to go, but this has been great. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, see you tomorrow.